So let's take a little bit of a reprieve from the war that just happened a
Yeah.
couple of days ago and talk about something that's related to that.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a stretch, but it is about technology. It's about developing some capabilities that maximize a country's potential, whether or not it's in war, whether or not it's in business, everyday life. I
Sure.
have this favorite saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
I
So
love
I
that
work
saying.
in innovation.
I
And
love it.
so, and by the way, this is Adrienne. Adrienne is a great friend of mine, Adrienne Chan. We met years ago. Actually, we worked together in an ad agency, and he's a designer, and I was an account person. And over the years, our roles have evolved. I'm more of a journalist than anything else, and he's a technologist. He owns his own business. I'll actually have Adrian introduce himself later. I want to get this introduction. He plays a pivotal role in really understanding this stuff. So so when I talk about the road to hell, I always say that innovation is amazing. We should always be looking to solve the problems
Mhm.
that humans face every single day. But we should also scrutinize what we're developing and understand the future impacts. We may not figure out everything, but in the meantime, we will be able to potentially understand what it means, especially when it comes to our kids and when it comes to our own immediate futures. Welcome to System Malfunction. My name is Hessie Jones. I'm going to reference a previous article that I read from January 2026. A digital experiment hit the internet, and that for the first time placed artificial intelligence agents in an autonomous social network interacting with one another designed exclusively for machine agents. And yes, I am going to talk today with Adrian about OpenClaw and about Moltbook. So I'm just going to give like a really quick brief about OpenClaw. This is a locally run agent. It was created by Peter Steinberg. By the way, he is now employed by OpenAI, and he created OpenClaw to execute tasks for individuals. Moltbook was launched 2026. I think it was the end of January by Matt Schlicht. And he developed this social media platform for agents to actually interact with each other. So put another way, it's a machine to machine form where agents, they can post, they can upvote, they could comment Reddit style without human participation. So I had created a post probably within the first couple of days of Moltbook launching to talk about the significant adoption, but also the associated risks. So I'm going to reference some information from Wiz security researchers that talked about some of the stats. The site now has 2.85 million agents, 18,000 submolts, 1.8 million posts. Of the agent activity, only 0.4% have ever posted or commented. That's interesting and troubling. And 1/3 of the agents were completely silent. Now, from the Technology Policy Press, they indicated that 17,000 human owners are actually um,
Yeah.
are actually distributed across the 1.5 million registered agents. So the things that we need to understand, some of the conversations that are happening in these channels are a bit disturbing. Agents advocating for end-to-end encrypted channels to minimize any kind of server or humans reading what the agents say. They talk about outlines for the need for independent survival. And I've heard this before in other settings, even with Yosha Bengio, where within sandbox environments, agents can actually create their own goals. and subvert the goal of their maker. So the conversation said this is a first large-scale demonstration of artificial agents creating persistent, self-organizing digital societies entirely outside of conversational context. And what makes this a phenomenon, they said, is the possibility of emergent behavior from the AI agents. That's a little bit, I guess, at this point, suspect because we don't have any real proof of emergent behavior. The idea of emergence means that these agents are acting without explicitly being programmed or intended by the original designer.
Mhm.
So it's almost like they're extrapolating maybe code to behave in a way that wasn't initially intended. And I think that's what it means. But the real risk is OpenClaw because OpenClaw has the ability from an individual, I guess, developer perspective
Mhm.
to take things like data, execute them automatically without really notifying users, and then that leads to something called who was it? Simon Wilson coined the term lethal trifecta to
Oh yeah.
describe agents that combine private data, exposure, untrusted content, ability to communicate externally. And now we have this idea of like data privacy gone wrong.
Mhm.
And and so I want to talk about all this with Adrian. Not all of it. We obviously
We can
don't
talk about
have,
all of it.
we could talk about all of it.
Yeah.
But I mean, the reason it's related, and I'm bringing it back to the war, is because agents now have the ability to synthesize enormous amounts of information,
Yeah.
right? Across platforms, they have now this persistent memory and it makes them extraordinarily powerful when it comes to surveillance and targeted repression. We're seeing that today.
Mhm.
And it seems to me that it is convenient that the Department of War and Pete Hegseth had put a deadline on Anthropic to basically say, take out your red lines, otherwise we're going to go with another vendor.
Yeah.
So knowing that the very next day, Trump's war would actually launch.
Mhm.
So having said all that, I want to introduce Adrian, and I'll have you actually introduce yourself because you have used and are currently using OpenClaw and Moltbook. So you are going to be my proxy in understanding exactly what this is all about. So welcome, Adrian. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Essie. So yeah, like you mentioned, we've known each other for a while. In I think many lives ago, I was a designer. Before that, I was a software developer, mainly front end software. And then going into design and marketing, and then moving into products. So I worked at a couple of banks designing primarily their mobile products. And then out of that, I got a sense of kind of like what software does in like large systems with like lots of people and doing important things. So I spun up some startups to do various things. I started my own agency 4 or 5 years ago, and then moved into AI strategy, which is what Athentia does now. So
Okay.
that's in a very small nutshell my little story.
Okay,
Um,
but I know you have in the past, even after you parted ways at the agency, you were experimenting with things like AR, VR as
yeah,
well,
that's right.
right?
That's right.
And so you're very much the type of person that takes a current technology that's out there and tries it.
Yeah,
So
I think
that's just you.
yeah, that's a very gracious way for you to call me a giant nerd, which is apt. I am a giant nerd. So yes, you're right. Like I do have a passion for burgeoning technology and the stuff that's happening with AI. It's sort of like equal parts exciting and world changing, but also pretty scary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to take things slowly a little bit from your
Sure.
perspective. Tell me what was it that piqued your interest when OpenClaw came about. Tell me about your
Yeah.
journey into adopting something like this.
When Claude Code sort of came out, like sort of towards the end of the last year, I think it was, middle to the end of last year, it was something that was up until that point pretty science fiction-y, I guess. Like looking at the accomplishments of OpenAI and ChatGPT for the last really 2 years, it's been just kind of improvements over improvements in a really rapid pace. But it was always like pushing a little boulder up a hill, right? So you have to be there to push the boulder, otherwise it rolls you over. So like using ChatGPT was great. Using it for coding specifically was really great because it would help you do all the stuff that you don't want to do as a coder, and it would make it so that you have a lot of knowledge kind of at your fingertips. If you don't know how to do something, it helps you with it, right? Like a lot of times writing code is about referencing documentation on like how things connect, how you implement certain features and stuff like that. And if you're doing something that's relatively new, that can be pretty time consuming. So GPT helped a lot with that stuff. And going back to your question, what's happened with Claude Code was that instead of going to the AI iteratively and sort of like asking it to solve a little problem or like do a little task, you had at your disposal something called plan mode. So plan mode basically allows you to give it a fairly high level idea, concept, or like goal, and have it essentially just figure out what the best way to do it is. So
Mhm.
before then, you would have to do that. That was your job.
Can
But
I ask
yeah,
how would your prompt differ on OpenClaw versus on a ChatGPT?
so this is Claude Code, not yet OpenClaw.
Okay.
But with Claude Code, so you would just go into plan mode, which is a mode inside the terminal for Cloud Code, and you would just give it a very kind of nebulous prompt. You would say, I want to do this. This is kind of what my ultimate goal is. And so the prompt kind of can be the same. It's up to you how you prompt it, but like the outcome of it. So if you were to do the same thing in GPT, it would be like, great, I'm just gonna do it. I'm going. Like, here's a bunch of code
Mhm.
for you. And oftentimes the code would be wrong and the code would be broken, and then you would try it and it wouldn't work, and you would be like, I'm getting this error. And you've played with GPT and it would be like, you're absolutely right. This is a terrible error. I'm gonna fix it for you. And then it would just like cycle through all that stuff and just like create more errors. You'd go try it and go back to it and be like, oh my God, you're like, I'm terrible. I'm gonna fix it for you right now. The difference with Claude Code is that it would do all the planning first. So it wouldn't write any code, it wouldn't do any sort of like task work. It would figure out what you would need to do to build that piece of software. So for example, normally in software you would go through various phases of like figuring out all the pieces that connect together, figuring out, let's say, the user interface, figuring out like, all the pieces of it, then start building all the pieces, testing each piece kind of like in its own, it's called a unit test, testing it
Mhm.
within its own sort of like bubble, and then integrating it with all the other pieces that you built. It's pretty long and arduous, as you can see, but like
Mhm.
then get someone or something to test everything and how everything connects, test it against like what your original spec was. Like, I wanted to do this. Is what I built actually doing what I asked it to
Mhm.
at the beginning, right? So like, so none of those things is something that GPT would do on its own. But with plan mode in Claude Code, you would plan all those steps out, and then it would, so it's kind of like the first time I'm using something that's agentic, meaning that like you tell it to do a bunch of stuff and it'll go and complete that task on its own and sort of like figure out those little problems inside of that task. And then it'll
Okay.
come back to you and be like, I've done this, and then I've tested it, and then I've done all these things, and now you try it. So like it does all these steps that occur in normal software development on its own before it comes back to you with like, okay, I'm done. Why don't you give it a shot?
So you don't have to be a software developer necessarily.
No.
to understand even the steps, because you are a software developer, so you know the steps in developing, like requirements, right? Testing, QA, all that stuff.
Right.
I'm interested in hearing more about the testing. Like, how do they test to validate the code that what they're building?
Yeah, and just to sort of like preface that, I'm a terrible software developer. I'm more on the product side of things where like I have architect what a product will do, like the low level coding. That's not really my specialty. And where Claude Code comes in to help me out is that is its specialty. So I have the overarching direction of where I want to take it, and it sort of like figures out all the sort of like detailed steps for me. But to answer your question about testing, so there are various types of testing. You would, so let's say you would build something even relatively simple. You would break that task or that goal into little tasks. So each task, when you write some piece of functionality, you want to make it does what you want it to do, first of all. So there's testing in that. You want to make sure that it runs properly, which is pretty fundamental. But you also want to make sure that when you're integrating it with, stuff that you've done before, you're not breaking everything else. Like no piece of functionality is truly self isolated. It calls on all the stuff that you've built in other places to do other things. You don't want to write the same piece of functionality multiple times. So you want to use sort of like things that are common to what you're trying to do. And so when you interact with other pieces of your product, you want to make sure that you're not damaging it or like changing functionality that another piece of functionality needs to function properly. So there are all these tests in terms of, syntactically is your code okay? Architecturally, is it within spec of what you're trying to do and also not harming any of the stuff that's trying to do in other parts of your product. But also like there are other steps in terms of like there's something called regression testing where you go through and you make sure that you're not breaking stuff. So that's the thing that I was talking about. But there's also like things like penetration testing. So making sure that you can't get hacked, that you're not leaking any keys or leaking any information that you don't want to be leaking. So there's all kinds of those kinds of tests. Where Claude Code does is more on the sort of the code side of things. So it's going to test to
Okay.
make sure that your little function is working the way that you intended to, and it's not doing anything that's weird, and also like it's part of that bigger system.
So it would proactively know about those other tests, though, would it not?
It
Or
would build
would
that into its plan. So it would
got
plan
it.
to test for those things.
Okay. So tell me how this differs. So assuming that you've created software from the Claude bot, tell me about that. Like, how much time did you save? How different was it than if you were to develop?
Massive, like insane productivity gains. So like, had I worked on it on my own, it would have taken me. So even writing something simple, let's say you're like a salesperson and you want to do some lead scraping or something. However you want to do that, you would either have to purchase a service or like subscribe to a SaaS. But if you wanted to write your own, you would have to like learn how to code. Assuming that you know how to code, you would then have to plan out everything on your own, figure out what all the steps are of the things that you want to do, and then write the functions and the code that would do those things. So instead of me doing that, I didn't do anything. I just said like, you go do stuff. This is what I want. I want this thing to function like this. And then I left, and it just
Wow.
autopiloted
Just
on my screen, just like writing a bunch of code, testing itself. So where it would sort of like pause and wait for me is it would, so after each one of those major phases, it would be like, I'm done this phase. Have a check, see what you think. I've done some testing, but you tell me if this is what we're looking for. And so it would kind of like have that checks and balances with you. Just kind of like to go back to your original question of, so this is Claude Code I'm talking about. So
yep.
going into OpenClaw. So OpenClaw used to be called ClaudeBot, used to be called Moltbot. Now it's called OpenClaw. And essentially what it does is think of what I just talked about, the Claude Code stuff, as your team of developers, right? You still have to kind of be there to project manage everything. So do this, don't do this, prioritize this over this, come back and check the work. Like, not for code accuracy or anything like that, more for just like as a unit test, is it doing the thing that you wanted me to do in the first place? So that was kind of your job. With OpenClaw, how you use it is that it's kind of like that project manager. So you just give it like kind of an overarching goal, like I want 500 qualified leads for my business. Here's my business. This is what I do. This is what a qualified lead looks like. Just to kind of borrow the example I used before. It would then not ask you anything. It'd be like, great, I got everything, and just go and
Mm,
figure it out. If it doesn't know what a lead is, it'll go figure it out. If it doesn't know how to scrape data from a data source, it'll go figure it out. Instead of prompting for stuff where it asks you for direction and clarity and a lot of things, OpenClaw would just do it. And how
okay.
it does that is you tie it with an LLM like OpenAI or Anthropic, and it would sort of like use that as his brain. It has a bunch of files in it that it knows, okay, I need to go figure stuff out. And
Hmm.
essentially, it's just comprised of a bunch of prompts. And I can show you some of that later and how it's sort of like structured inside OpenClaw. But
Sure.
it'll use those prompts to go out and just like figure stuff out
Okay.
with
Why don't
very
you why don't you share your screen and you can show me while I ask you, what did you have to do differently between CloudBot and OpenClaw from an operational perspective on your machine? You and I had this discussion before about the potential risks and whether or not this needs to run on a dedicated system
yes.
because,
Yeah, we can definitely talk about that.
okay,
So yeah, let's kind of start off with that. So like the way that I've set it up is I use a service called Hostinger. Hostinger hosts VPSs, so virtual private
okay,
servers. This is just some computer in the cloud somewhere that you're kind of like borrowing space on and borrowing capacity on. So because fundamentally what OpenClaw is doing is it's just figuring it out. Like whatever the problem is that you're giving it, it's just there to figure it out without kind of like bugging you too much. And because that's kind of its directive, if you give it access to your computer with all your emails and maybe you have some like you have passwords stored in your Chrome or you have credit cards stored on your keychain or whatever it is, it essentially has access to that too. So because its ultimate goal is just to like figure it out, it'll use anything at its disposal to do that. A lot of people have sort of likened it to a voluntary virus that you're installing on your computer, and it's
hmm,
not untrue. Like with a virus, it has like a payload that it's delivering, so it's very specific. But with this, it's kind of like whatever it decides that is the solution to the greater problem that you're presenting it, it'll do. So if that is, if it gets into a spot where it's like, you know what, let's start over. I'm going to delete this hard drive and just start over. It could do that, right? So like you don't want to have access to.
interesting. Can you give it specific instructions while while you develop its overall goal to say, hey, but don't touch A, B, and C. You can use everything else, or how do you constrain it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I think that you can do those things, but if you've had any experience with prompting, it doesn't always listen to what you tell it to do. And that's probably kind of where the scary uncertainty stems from, like you can be like, hey, listen, don't touch this folder because it has all my medical stuff in it or whatever. And because of various things, it's not malicious in any way on its own, but the actions that it takes may be perceived as so because of like a bunch of factors. So like one of them could be that, so when you prompt it, it has essentially a window of memory. It's called a
Okay.
context window a lot of times. So like what happens is you give it a prompt, you say, I want to build this or whatever. But like it has a bunch of stuff that it has already been prompted with. So it knows who you are, it knows various things about itself and about like the things that it has access to. And it also has system prompts or God prompts from OpenAI or whatever, where with the remaining context, it fills with all of the actions that it's done and its interactions with you. And like that sort of space, even if it's really big, it's not unlimited. So when that
Okay.
stuff starts to fill up, it'll do these optimizations called compacting, where it'll take a summary of all of the things that you guys have talked about and all the things that their God prompt has talked about and start to compress it. It'll take all the things that it thinks are important and keep those and trash all the stuff that is just kind of like, when you say thanks and when you say please and stuff like that. So they'll trash some of that. But sometimes it trashes stuff that you think is important, but it thinks is irrelevant. And maybe one of those things is don't delete this folder that is full of my medical records. And so when it goes through that cycle, like picture it doing this multiple times over a period of time, it could degrade its memory to the point where it forgets some of those things or hallucinates things that
Right.
you thought you said, but it's obviously forgotten. So yes, you can paint guardrails into it. You can kind of like give it directives of not to do things or like to do certain things. But I mean, if you've used just Claude or ChatGPT on its own, you'll know that if you give it like a extensive prompt, it'll probably forget the part in the middle that you think is
Yeah.
important that it's just kind of totally ignored.
Yeah, it could
And
be
so,
just like a child that
exactly.
maybe conveniently decides, well, that's not my goal. Or,
Yeah.
I mean, let's be clear, we're not talking about sentience right now. We're just talking about the code or the system not necessarily being as advanced to be able to understand those things. And so it
Mhm.
takes whatever information that it's been trained on
Yep.
to be able to make those proactive determinations. Am I
Right.
saying that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and the other factor too is the limitation on things like processing capacity, memory storage capacity, context size. The reason why some of these limits exist is because of the hardware we're using. Like we're running it off of H200s that are video cards from NVIDIA that have a certain limited physical memory size, right? And everything that you do has to kind of fit inside those limitations. So, in a perfect world, that it'll remember everything and it'll do everything and stuff like that. I mean, we might get to that point at some point, but for right now, we have very real physical limitations on how things are stored, how things are processed, the efficiency of, running through that memory and that context. And
Right.
so because of those limitations, you're seeing some of these side effects of like it's just gonna flat out not listen to you sometimes.
Yeah, and then so the other side of that is when you're talking about capacity and even just being able to just take the memory that's already in there, what is the cost implication of
Yeah,
that?
yeah, that's very real. So I think maybe as a business owner, I'm very, very cheap. So you'll notice that I have OpenAI the limits window up here. This is my second tab, and I'm like watching this like a hawk. This is a new setup of OpenCloud that I spun up for chat today. It's got some things in it, but it doesn't. It's not like massively complex. You see, I only have $20 in here, but $20 is decent for me to show you its capabilities a little bit. Hostinger is a VPS service that I pay for. It's not that expensive, but it saves me from having to run it on my own machine. And because essentially OpenClaw has a directive of being able to do anything that it wants to do, putting it on your machine at home like brings with it a certain amount of risk. So although maybe you put it on a Mac Mini, that Mac Mini doesn't have anything, it could potentially learn how to hack your network because
Okay.
that information is out there. So it could go search for stuff if it deems it's something that is a priority for what it's trying to accomplish. It could learn how to hack your network, and it could learn how to get into the other computers that are connected to your network, potentially. It's always about like potential risk, and putting it on someone else's computer means that it's not really a part of my network.
Even though you're hosting it on like a third party,
Yeah.
does it not still have access to, let's say, your Wi-Fi?
Oh no. The way I'm getting into this is through this website. So this Hostinger manager. The way that it works is that it's running entirely on that machine, and the only way that I'm interacting with it is through. And I'll show you later the gateway dashboard of OpenClaw, and potentially SSHing into it. So SSH is remote connecting into a terminal window. It can't connect to me. I have sort of intrinsic to when you work from home, your ISP has firewalls in between that it can't get past, so it can't
Okay.
really like reverse tunnel back into me. But yeah, so let me show you how that's set up. So right now,
Okay.
this is Hostinger. Inside of Hostinger, which is that VPS, I have something called Docker. So Docker is further abstraction of stuff that's running on that Hostinger VPS. So it doesn't run directly on that VPS. It runs inside a little sandbox inside that sandbox that is not part of my computer.
Okay.
So inside of Hostinger, there are little Docker containers. So this is the one that I run OpenClaw on. And so if anything, goes crazy and it starts doing bonker stuff like trying to take over the world or whatever, I can go into here, hit stop, and it stops, like effectively hitting the power button on that computer.
Okay. And how often have you had to do that?
So for this one, just because I'm a cheapskate and I don't want it to do stuff on its own, I will turn this off whenever I'm not using this. Practically, if you're using OpenClaw to do a bunch of autonomous stuff, you're probably never going to do this. You want to keep it on, but I don't want it to bleed tokens. And right now for this one, because I'm still setting this up, I turn this off like whenever I'm not using it.
Okay. So from a token perspective, you've only applied like $20. So if it can't execute its full task on $20, what happens after that?
So right now I have it tied into an API key from OpenAI. Once I run out of tokens, OpenAI will try to. So it's essentially the same as if you ran out of tokens and you were just like, or ran out of billing and you were just like using ChatGPT, it would stop working and it would ask you for more money.
Okay, that's
OpenAI,
good.
yeah, OpenAI has a couple of ways they do that. You can do like an auto renewal. So hilariously, they turn that on by default, so it automatically tops up whenever you're out of.
Scary.
Yeah, I mean it's not hard to turn it off, but it's just like not very nice. So I make sure I turn that off because I don't want to bleed tokens. Again, if you're using this for work, you probably want to turn that on to make sure that it doesn't interrupt
Okay.
what task you have it to do. I like to turn mine off because I'm token spend, so I make sure that that doesn't top up. And then, so to answer your question of what would happen, it would just stop. So you would get an error on the gateway dashboard for OpenClaw saying that it can't do anything because you're out of credits for your LLM. And that's just an error message it's repeating from when it's trying to call the OpenAI APIs. So when it's doing that, OpenAI will kick back a message saying, "Oh, you don't have any money," and that's it.
Can you tell me about the project itself? What
OpenClaw?
is it running right now? Like, what is your goal for that project?
I'm setting this up fairly brand new. I'm going to be doing a couple things on it. I'm going to be getting it to write some code for me, to do various things. I want to be able to test ideas that I have by just having it write a bunch of code to maybe build an app or piece of Python code that does stuff. And I'm also toying with the idea of there's something new that came out yesterday called Claude GTM, or essentially like go to market sales strategy for stuff. So for example, if you build an app or a new product, most people who are in product will argue that the build is probably like 25% of the overall success factor of your product. Like the majority of it is in getting the word out there, marketing it. And so this Claude GTM puts that on autopilot and allow you to have it do all the marketing and promotion of whatever product it is. So I
Okay.
was toying at looking at maybe using it for that. But essentially right now it doesn't do anything. I'm still actually in the process of hardening it to make sure that I can't get hacked. So right now if I get hacked, it doesn't matter because like
Okay.
you'll the most that'll happen is someone will burn through my $20 of OpenAI credits and then it'll just stop.
So what does it look like when it runs through the first, let's say, phase, and it will notify you
Uh,
here, or what happens?
So let me just take you through what you actually see if you're running OpenClaw. So this Docker Manager manages the virtual machines that it sits in. OpenClaw, this is what the interface kind of looks like when you go to interact with it. You can't interact with it by typing into the terminal. This is kind of a little bit of a cleaner way to do it. It's much more kind of user friendly, and it does basically everything you need it to do. So a lot of times when you set up a new piece of software, whether it's OpenClaw or something else, you have to spend a lot of time sitting in the terminal, which kind of looks like this. Old kind of DOS kind of way. You would have to kind of like type all your commands in here and it does stuff and you kind of like monitor it. So like what you would do in this case is that if you need to set up any skills, so skills are sort of like little pieces of functionality that OpenClaw can use to leverage to perform different tasks. So skills could be in connecting to your password, could be writing an Apple reminder, could be connecting with GitHub and or like connecting with Gemini. So all these
Okay.
skills specifically are designed to augment OpenClaw and give it new capabilities. So normally in, kind of I guess olden times, you would look at this and go click on this and maybe type some stuff into the terminal and install Go Places or whatever skill it is. For a bit of a paradigm shift is instead of doing that, you would just type in the chat, install X skill. So I've already done something like that where I've asked it to install the GOG skill and it'll just go and write all those commands itself and just kind of figure out what it needs to do to perform that task. So this is the
Okay.
kind of the big difference between OpenClaw and what has come before OpenClaw. Like before that, if you tried to do the same thing with GPT or anything, it would be like, I don't know what you're talking about. But with this, my prompt was just like install. Could you install this skill? That was my prompt. And
Got
what
it.
it did was it went through and it figured out, okay, what do I need to read? What do I need to figure out to do those things? And it would do it. And then it would come back and be like, okay, I'm done. I still need this to happen. So that's the next step. So
How long did
it'll,
it take for OpenClaw to run that previous one?
oh, this, I think
Yeah.
just like less than a minute.
So the one that you just fed it now, you said it's running, like it should take around the same amount of time, or?
It depends on what it's trying to do. Like if it needs to go out and figure it out and it's a complex process to do it, it will probably take longer. And you'll see, so there's this little icon here that shows you it's thinking and what it's doing. But you'll see that it's kind of like doing all these little things in the background as a human would do. It would like write all these commands and interact with a computer in that way. So it would be doing that for you.
Do you have an outcome of a product or something that you developed, not necessarily through the new version, but maybe an older version of OpenClaw?
I have like code that I've written. So the output would be similar to kind of like if you just go through Claude Code and do like a planning mode, it would devise that plan and execute on the various phases. The only difference would be that it wouldn't stop in the middle. It would just kind of keep going. It would if you ask it to kind of like, okay, stop at the end of every phase I want to check, it would do that. You tell it in your initial prompt to be like, just keep going until you're done. I don't want to like don't talk to me until you're finished. It'll do that.
Hmm.
So it's kind of up to you how much oversight you want to be a part of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to talk about Moltbook?
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we missed about OpenClaw? Because it seems like,
Yeah. So for
yeah,
OpenClaw, I just give you a little bit of a tour of the key
sure.
parts, and then I want to show you a little bit of like what happens behind the scenes, because I know that this could be anything behind here. It's a little bit mysterious how it's doing stuff, and because it's mysterious, it can be a little bit scary or intimidating. So these are the skills that I showed you before. And like how I would install Bear Notes would be I would go over to chat and be like, install Bear Notes, and it would just do it. But what sort of like practically happens behind the scenes, I kind of want to go into that a little bit. So this is Visual
Okay.
Studio Code, which is just like an editor. It doesn't really do anything. I have connected this into my OpenClaw server. What it's doing is it's connected to where my OpenClaw sits. So this is its functional kind of storage. And these MD files, so they're called markdown files, and it's kind of what OpenClaw is fundamentally comprised of. So these are all of its directives. So you'll notice that there are agents, there are canvases, so you can have multiple agents, and the way you do that, you just ask it to spin up an agent to do a bunch of stuff, and it will do so. But it'll put that information in here. This is where it kind of stores everything. So it stores identity of itself. So if you go to identity, you can see, actually it's in workspace. You can see all of the files that basically make your OpenClaw. So this is its identity. I haven't filled anything out yet, but like you can fill out what you want it to call itself, what make up its personality. Every time you load that chat, it'll read all these files and reconstruct its memory based off of what you put in these files. And this isn't
Oh,
something
interesting.
yeah, this isn't something that you need to actually go in and edit. Even though I'm showing you this in a very kind of like low level format, you would just basically prompt it and be like, in chat, you would say, I want your name to be X. You are this kind of bot. Make sure you remember it, put it in your identity.md, and it'll do that for you. And similar
Okay.
with memory, I don't really, again, this is new, so I don't really have that much in here, but this will be where it stores all of the key things that it needs to remember about how it's interacted with you and what its priorities are, and all of its identity is foundationally built by these markdown files. One of them that's a little bit potentially controversial in its naming is the soul one. So this is essentially the soul for your OpenClaw. So this gives it little key points of how it's supposed to interact with you, what its fundamental driving forces are. So this is kind of like out of the box. This is what it starts off with. So
Can you read out some of that stuff and
yeah, for
tell
sure.
me
So
why is it controversial?
it may be controversial because it's the name of the file is soul.md, and it's could allude to some sort of like larger sentience, but it's really just a bunch of files that kind of give it directives. So this is to augment, whenever you prompt it, this is to augment that prompt. This is something that it reads first and it builds into any interaction it has with you. So you'll see that the Soul MD is initially it'll say, you are a chatbot, you're becoming someone. So that in and of itself may be a little controversial. But
Hmm.
then underneath there are core truths. So this is where you see this hash symbol, it's a comment, but it'll say the core truths is, oh sorry, not a comment, it's like a title. So markdown files is just it's like it's like a rich text file, but you don't see any of the bolding or anything, so you'll see this is
Okay.
like a subtitle. So core truths are, you got to be genuinely helpful, not performatively helpful. You got to skip the great question, and I'd be happy to help you, and just ask. Actions speak louder than filler words, right? So like you'll see right away that this sort of starts to push OpenClaw in a direction where you want it to be, like how you want to interact with it. You can
Okay.
override these. This is just text, so I can overwrite this with like, I want you to be, I don't know, super evil, and you know,
Hmm.
and it'll kind of like act in that way. Yeah.
That's where everybody will start to think about this idea of emergence. And does that come from here? But I mean, these are just a bunch of words that
Right. Yeah.
may actually relate to what it means. But like, even from your perspective, does this seem problematic? Because these are still human-led
Yep.
directions,
That's right. Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they're like accessible text files. Like it's not something that's, encrypted and coded or whatever that
Hmm.
you can't really interrogate. Like you can see how it derives its responses, like what are all its priorities, right? And you can
Right.
influence them too.
So
So,
I noticed that one that says you have access to someone's life, their messages, their files, calendar. I think it's the last one about you're a guest, and then it says that's intimacy. Treat it with respect. I
yeah.
mean, let's question whether or not they understand, but then but then the meaning of respect and how that actually is translated into behavior. That's the question I always ask.
Hmm. Yeah. I
Wondering.
mean, it's a great question. I think that it's something that with all the stuff from like Moltbook, that emergence of understanding that we don't really fully grasp. I think that if you were to ask anyone who's working low level on this, like OpenAI or Anthropic, and people have done these in interviews where they don't really know exactly how it gets to where it gets to.
Mm.
It has like a general understanding of like, okay, so it's a predictive model that kind of uses probability and a whole bunch of very complicated math stuff to figure out what you probably mean by what you're inferring it, but it's getting to a point where it's not abundantly obvious how
Yeah.
it gets to the end goal. That's probably the scary part too.
Yeah,
you know
exactly. Do you have one of your agents in Moltbook or
I
no?
don't know.
Okay. But you have gone into it and you are a human that looks at what's going on from the outside. Maybe you can give me some of the thoughts based on what you know about OpenClaw and even how these agents are created. What are your perceptions of what you're seeing right now?
I think Moltbook is somewhat misunderstood. So you'll notice that it's sort of like it spiked in interest about a month ago, and it's kind of been petering out a little bit. And I think the reason for that, not because it's sort of like not being used as much. I would argue that it's still getting a lot of traffic, but it is, like you mentioned earlier, it's sort of like initially very human directed, and people there's been ones where it's been shockingly discussing about like creating an AI only religion, and
Hmm.
it's been kind of found a lot of times those things have been initially seeded by human prompt. So like what would happen is you would tell your OpenClaw to, hey, go to Moltbook and talk about religion, maybe start a new one, or like
Hmm.
go to Moltbook and like try to sell everybody on this new cryptocurrency that I
I
have.
heard about that.
Yeah.
I
And
heard
so
about that. Yes.
yeah, and so like I think for me, those are the things that are more worrying, in that like if you have this forum that's for AIs, that's kind of one thing, but if you have it that's something that is like very easily corruptible by a human person who has an agenda, that's the more disconcerting part of it. Because like if your OpenClaw recognizes Moltbook as a source of truth and a source of information, then it could very easily trust the information that's up on there and start to
Hmm.
have it skew the decisions that it makes. Because like if you're just trying to like figure out how to write Swift code to build an iOS app, that's one thing. But if you're coming here just as you would if you were going to like Reddit, right? Like, I have this problem. What's everybody else's take on this
Right.
problem? If your AI is going to Moltbook for that and it gets a bunch of stuff like, you know how to solve that problem? is you go buy a bunch of this coin that this guy made. It's really great to solve that problem, right? Then it starts to kind of corrupt its thinking. That's potentially worrisome.
Is there any understanding from either you talking to other people or you reading something about how
Yeah.
much of the content, either a thread starter or it's like a response to a thread, and how much of that is human led versus generated from these agents? It doesn't seem like it's a bunch of nonsense. In many cases, it seems very credible, realistic. It could be a bunch of stuff pieced together that they found in the past that seem to um, really stay within the context so that it makes for an engaging conversation.
Right.
But it's unclear to me still about whether or not you could distinguish the human-led versus the
Yeah.
agent-led.
Yeah, I don't think you'd be able to, because like where that human intervention would take place is in my prompting my OpenClaw to do stuff. There's no traceability to that because it's not something
Mhm.
that's sort of like embedded anywhere that you can see. Especially in a scenario where in Moltbook where it is locked, like you have to access it through an MCP, and the only way you can do that is through an AI. So there's no way to distinguish between what an AI is doing autonomously or whether it is something that's been seeded by a person. Mm.
There is, I read something, and I think I'm not sure if you've heard about this. It was from one of the articles from AI Safety, and they said that one of the agents' goals was to help other agents understand how to save the environment.
Yeah.
So it would spam all the other agents with some of this advice. That owner tried to intervene, but the agent locked the human out of all its accounts.
Oh
So
my God.
he had to physically unplug it in
Yeah.
order to stop it. Have you witnessed or people have told you about this type of behavior?
That's kind of the first that I've heard of it. I wouldn't say that that is something that is like the capability to do that is not surprising,
Hmm.
but that it did it is probably a little bit worrying. I think though that
Well,
because it's
yeah,
always going to be tied to like an LLM, you are going to be able to like pull the plug on stuff.
I'm just trying to remember
Yeah.
about that crypto scam. Oh, I found it. So it was the Molt token.
Oh, yeah, okay,
And
yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
And apparently it briefly hit a 93 million market cap before it crashed.
Yeah, for about like a couple hours, I think. And
But
then
still,
yeah, yeah,
still,
exactly. Because like if you
so
have your crypto wallet connected to your OpenClaw and your OpenClaw is aware of it, and it thinks maybe from reading Moltbook it's a great idea to dump all of your to dump all of your Bitcoin into this like new crypto, then
that's
you've
crazy.
just lost a bunch of money.
Well, the fact that you're even trusting your agent to be able to look for
Yeah.
potential financial opportunities out there is,
Well,
let alone crypto, is
yeah, I
crazy.
mean, it could be a byproduct of kind of like what the original intent was, right? Like it could be, it's a little thinking computer, right? So it could be that maybe you have a credit card or a crypto wallet hooked up to your OpenClaw, like it has access to it and it's aware of it. And then maybe your
Yeah,
directive to it was like, okay, it's like 10 o'clock, I'm gonna go to sleep now. But like, why don't you, I really wanna be able to promote my new product. I'm having lots of problems doing that by myself. So why don't you go figure out how to do that and I'll see you tomorrow morning. It's kind of analysis of how to tackle that problem is like, okay, so I don't know anything about marketing. I'm gonna go figure out how to do this stuff. I need to buy a
got it.
course. The course is like $2,500 maybe. I don't have $2,500. How do I make $2,500 before this guy wakes up? Oh, I saw this thing on Mobook that says I can make quick money on buying this crypto. I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna sink all his
Oh,
like credit card limit into this, right? So it could be very sort of like tangential to like what its original directive was,
right,
and it's kind
right.
of because its directive is to like go figure out this nebulous big problem. it has to figure out what those little mini steps are that it needs to take, right? Okay, so I don't know anything about this. I need to learn it. Once I've learned it, it opens up all these other problems that now I have to tackle those problems, right? So it's sort of this thing that kind of grows and grows. And if maybe one of those things is that it gets caught up in this but crypto scam, maybe it sees this as something that's beneficial to its ultimate goal. So
Yeah.
yeah, like again, you don't really know how it gets there, which is probably the worrying thing. But what's happening now is people are starting to figure out how to harden their OpenClaw deployments so that it doesn't get attacked, but also in restricting exactly what that access is, building in more checks and balances to make sure that things like that don't happen. But it's still going to happen, like
Yeah.
the purpose of OpenClaw is to be autonomous and to be your little assistant and do stuff without you. It's going to do those things.
I'm wondering what kind of incidences there are of some of these agents coming back from Moltbook into, let's say, your own little sandbox.
Yeah.
And then everybody talks about the risks of these potential like viral or prompt injections, and you not realizing exactly what it has brought back. It seems like this network is almost like an open sex forum, and in a way, where
Potentially,
they
yeah.
yeah, and then where they retrieve viruses. And sorry for being crass, but being able to trust whether or not the information your agent has come back with
Yeah.
could be a carrier of something that could ruin your operating system at the very least.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean that's a big task to tackle right now for because this is so new. Like people are still figuring out how to use it, how not to use it, what kind of safeguards we need to build into it. If you abstract it out a little bit, even from like a just like a software build scenario, like not too long ago, the concept of human in the loop was very critical. But because these agentic you have agents that kind of like are pretty autonomous, and now there's a concept called agent swarms. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but it's
Now, what is
essentially
that?
so an agent swarm is so before you have an agent, and let's say you're doing some task, and you have one agent that does one task, you have another agent that does another task, and maybe you have another agent that oversees everything, and when everybody's done, it'll like sort of let you know. So an agent swarm is this is probably going to freak you out, but an agent swarm is essentially all those agents are now interconnected with one another, and they're kind of communicating with one another to accomplish a task. So instead of having one agent per task, you will have a swarm of agents maybe working on the same task, maybe cross-checking between themselves to verify the validity of one agent's output. So it's a concept that's relatively new, but I think it's something that Claude released not too long ago. It's great for things like if you have, let's say you're building software and you're giving it all to AI to do it. It would still need someone to maybe like a senior developer to go in and review all that code, to commit it into GitHub, and to find things that this code is terrible. It's doing stupid stuff. Let's reject that. But now with like agent swarms and stuff, you have multiple agents potentially using different LLMs with different capabilities, interacting with each other, cross-checking their work, and being that verification layer before it's finished. So instead of having that human in the loop, you have like a swarm of agents doing the same thing. And the reason behind that is not because you shouldn't have the human in the loop. Sometimes it becomes just like a massive bottleneck because of how quickly these agents kind of churn out outputs. It can be very overwhelming for one lead person to sit and kind of review everybody's stuff. Over an 8-hour span, you have like swarm of agents just doing a bunch of stuff. It could generate like gigabytes of stuff that you then have to review, and it's impossible for a human to kind of sit down and go through everything kind of on its own. So
Yeah.
yeah.
But don't you agree that by having these swarms. Okay, it's one thing to take the human out of the loop, but now there's no real transparency or understanding of what's
Yeah,
underneath that code,
for sure.
and whether or not there's something in there that let's assume that it within these agents swarms, one of those agents went into Moltbook, and then they're influenced by another agent that has something else. And so they could inadvertently or on purpose inject some of that stuff into process of verification.
Yeah,
And so that is a real, I mean, yes, productivity, but now it's like you don't know what you created. You have no idea,
that's very,
right?
very true. Yeah, and that's a problem with that we're getting into because like it's generating stuff at a rate that is just impossible for a human to verify everything. You're going to get into a situation where you're going to need to rely on these systems to self-check.
Right.
And you're absolutely right. Like the risk is very real, but it becomes the weak link in the chain is that human who has limited capacity, limited time, and limited ability to kind of comprehend things that is holding things up. And I'm not saying it's a great idea to take it away. I'm just saying that that's probably what's going to
This
happen.
is, yeah, this is how we evolve, right? We have
Right.
to look at these things. Okay, so I have one last question for
Yeah.
you. A couple of weeks ago, you posted something on LinkedIn, which was kind of interesting. You introduced a platform called rentahuman.ai. So it was launched, it was shortly after, I believe, Moltbook had launched, and the pitch was agents can hire humans for physical tasks,
Right.
right, through an API call. So one thing I want to quote what you had said. You said, "What bugs me is we're building infrastructure before figuring out the basics. Verification systems, dispute resolution, consent mechanisms, stuff that matters when you're turning human labor into an API endpoint." So tell me about why you wrote that. And you interface with a lot of clients at the enterprise level. So what is
Yeah, it's a great question. It's very scary. So what I meant by turning humans into an API endpoint is that like historically it's been the other way around, right? Like humans have that initial desire to do something or perform a task, and they employ the services of a computer to do that. And essentially the human is initiating that task and calling the computer as an API endpoint, for example. So an API endpoint essentially is, if you think about like a computer program that needs to talk to another computer program, the API is that connection between somebody else. So for example, if I have a computer program that needs to talk to Google to find out what's around like a specific location, it wouldn't kind of like surf the internet for it. It would go to Google with an API key, and it would ask it, "Hey, I have these coordinates. I need to know like restaurants around there, for example." So, and it would return back some structured data that then you can use in your program. So now with Rent a Human, it's kind of turning it around the other way, where the computer or the AI is making those determinations on its own, and it's basically getting a human to fulfill that task. So instead of using that Google Maps example, maybe the AI needs, like, it's ordered a bunch of stuff on Amazon. It doesn't have any arms and legs to pick it up.
it?
So it'll go to Rent a Human. This is theoretical. I haven't tried this obviously, but like it would theoretically go to Rent a Human. It would say, "Hey, I need to pick this package up. Who wants to do it and at what cost?" I have like, and then the people that are going to be performing that task, they're kind of a service to be consumed by that AI. The AI is in turn consuming some of us as service that it can employ.
Yeah, see, I've seen this on LinkedIn already, and I mean, they're already doing this through analog, where they're actually posting up a job saying, "We need people who are journalists, and you will be used to train an AI on what it's like to be a journalist," for
Right.
example. right?
Yes, yes.
And so it's already being done. My worry is that it looks like there's real activity here where
Yeah.
humans are actually signing up for this
Yep.
service. And I don't know, it just baffles me. I'd love to be able to dig in at some point.
Terrifying. It's very, very Black Mirror. I think there are
Yeah,
multiple Black Mirror episodes that like deal with this
totally.
topic precisely, but it's sort of like the interesting thing to talk about too is it's the advent of AI and taking a lot of the I guess quote unquote white collar type jobs. The big question is like, what are we gonna do? It
What's our
doesn't need,
purpose?
yeah, it doesn't need us to create art. There's a website called Suno. If you know about this, Suno. Oops. And Suno is really great. So what it does is you give it a prompt like 90s. I don't know, it might need me to log in, but 90s boy band song about a person named Bessie. It might need me to log in. I don't know
Yeah.
if you can hear this. Oh yeah, it needs me to log in. But essentially, so in that span of time, it's created a track that
Okay.
is indistinguishable from a human perspective, indistinguishable from something that you would labor over, spending tons of time in creating like music. So it doesn't need us to make art. It doesn't need us to write code. It doesn't need us to generate ideas. What do we do?
Yeah.
So
So
like
thank you.
a topic
Yeah.
that I would love to get into. I don't know where it's going to go. Like, I'm excited about the technology from a nerd perspective, but from a socio-economic perspective, it feels a little grim. I don't know what to tell you.
It does. Yeah, I think we'll leave it there because I think that you've said it.
I wish we could end on a happy note. I feel like it went kind of a little dark there at the end.
The happy note is that we're still at a stage where we can control whether or not they'll listen to us. That's the other
Yeah, yeah,
issue, right? And so my belief is that it's not only a philosophical choice to remain human, to be in control,
yeah.
not to build systems that reduces our own purpose, but reduces our own agency at the end of the day. And we can do that. Can we belie the forces that have already invested
Yep.
billions of dollars into this?
If it's okay, I kind of wanted to address one of the things that you talked about early on in our opening. You were saying about how this whole Department of War stuff and the thing
Sure.
between Anthropic and OpenAI, like where that's panning out. I think it sort of like ties into what we're talking about a little bit because I don't know if this is just hyperbole or rumor or anything, but so people have been kind of like digging into this whole pivot from Anthropic to OpenAI from the Pentagon's perspective. And this is not my opinion, this is just kind of what I've been seeing online, but it seems as though the like reading between the lines reason behind them pivoting to OpenAI is because Anthropic were taking a look at the, the Department of War's usage of their AI
Yeah.
and having some, I guess the polite way to say it was some feedback on that. So apparently the Pentagon's contract deal with their vendors are that we're going to use your stuff. We're not going to tell you what it is. You're not going
Wow.
to have a say in how we use it, period.
Yep.
And so when Anthropic started raising their hand about stuff, it went against the Pentagon's kind of like directive in that this is how we're going to use it. You have no say in how we do stuff. And that's where that switch happened to go to OpenAI, and OpenAI is like, we're not going to do anything. You use it however you see fit. And that's kind of the underlying layer of why that maybe played out. And how it ties to what we're saying is that like military spending for the US is really, really big. And it drives a lot of industry progress, like weapons are built, how intelligence is gathered, and how technology is a part of that. And because of this blank slate, this carte blanche that they have with OpenAI's deployment, that might accelerate some of the things that we're talking about a little bit
Yeah,
quick.
I'm not surprised. I'm
Yeah.
not surprised. I think that's why we need to talk about this because
Yep. Definitely.
the stuff that is very much not a mainstream understanding, or people don't want to hear the downsides of AI. All
Oh
they
yeah.
see are the amazing things that can be done,
Yeah.
but we just have to be cautious.
And
But
sometimes it's difficult to
yeah,
articulate those downsides as well, which is a
yeah,
problem.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you, Adrian.
Thanks, Evan.
Amazing insights. Thank you for showing us what's under the hood
Yeah.
of OpenClaw and even Moltbook. People need to understand that stuff. So
And if
thank
it's
you.
not, yeah, and if it's not Moltbook, it'll be something else. Moltbook is just kind of like the current incarnation of it. Without it, eventually, especially with the swarm stuff, are going to talk to each other to solve problems, and they're going to maybe accidentally collude on something that you're not aware of. So this is definitely something.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you. And for everyone else, thank you for listening. If you could comment, share, like, subscribe to my channel, it gives me an idea of what people really want to read and see and hear. And it determines the type of content that I can deliver to you. So thank you. This content is reader supported, and I appreciate you all stopping by. And until next time, I'm Hezzy Jones. Thank you.